May the blessing of the Holy Trinity the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit may it descend upon this host and may it become for us the body and the blood of Jesus Christ. May that be true for those who participate. can pause the video here if you want to meditate before the class. Okay, so this is Thursday's class, and I'm still not feeling up to par, and what that means is I feel fine until I expend energy, and then I get kind of wiped out a little bit, so I'm not as well as I thought. And so spiritually, when God comes over me and power comes through, it excites my system, and so a lot of times that'll make me feel worse when I'm done. And so I didn't prepare a super great class, kind of taking it easy, but I did have something I wanted to share, and it's totally not the gospel, the letter of Paul that we were reading. I wanted to talk about the 3 theological virtues. So if you guys remember, theology for beginners, there's these virtues, and I think there's the lower virtues, cardinal virtues, and then there's the theological virtues. And the reason they're called, it's faith, hope, and charity. Faith, hope, and love. Faith, hope, and charity. And the reason they're called theological virtues is because their aim, their end, is God itself. Many of the other virtues, all of the other virtues, their end can be towards God, but it really is like patience or perseverance, those kind of virtues, they have to do with our dealings with the world. And the theological virtues have to do with our dealings directly towards God, directly with God. So they're called the theological virtues. And they're the higher virtues. And everyone who is a Christian is practicing them. And I guess since I want to take my time, I don't have a lot written here, so there's not a lot to say. But I want to take my time. So if you could, I've noticed this with spirituality and religion, especially the language of religion. If I say, practice the theological virtues, you may be certain you don't. And I think you might be wrong. And so I want to just first, I want you to try to unhook from religion with it. Try to unhook from religious language. And tell me if this hasn't grown in you to some degree. Think in yourself now, are you sure you don't notice yourself having faith in God as a way of living? Are you sure you don't place hope in God as an activity? And are you sure you don't experience love for God as something you do? Because I'm guessing you might and you don't quite notice. And that has happened to me also on the path. And, the area I want to talk about right now, it's personal. I try not to share a lot of personal things, but it has to do with my daughter. You guys know that both Mary and I were raised terribly. Most of our family structure is not a good example for her. We've had to, in soft ways, keep her from being too exposed to it even, because I think it'd be harmful to her consciousness to see that as her family of origin. And you also know how lucky I am to have my Aunt Bonnie, who is kind of saintly, and her husband Ray, who is just a stalwart, Catholic Christian sweat lodge guy, Native American guy, and the family that they produce, which is so loving, and they've taken us under their wing, and we've clung onto them as a place where Cassidy can look for healthy family. But there are more examples of terrible family in my family of origin than good. And so there's been, it's settled, but there has been a need for faith in God to raise Cassidy into something good in the world, when there isn't a ton of good examples of what that means in family structure to see. And that's not a big deal, but I do know people that come from really good families, and every uncle and aunt and brother and sister is just another example of a neat way to live, and that's a gift that Mary and I don't have. And so there's been a lot of this sort of hope and faith. And so even though the theological virtues are officially defined as having God as their end, I don't think that, what if that wasn't the end? What if the theological virtues became so strong that bond of hope that you have with God, that bond of hope that you have in God, that bond of faith that you have in God, and that bond of faith that you have with God? What if that bond of love that you have with God, towards God and for God and with God, what if that bond turned outwards towards the other? What if the power of that bond and the joy of that bond and the beauty of that bond and the sacred nature of that bond, what if that turned outwards? What if you turned it outwards in love towards others? What might that mean? And so I wanted to think of the Beatitudes, the poverty of spirit and mourning and meekness, you finally don't want to do your will anymore, and then the hunger and thirst for God, which shall be satisfied, and the becoming pure of heart and seeing God. This is kind of what I'm talking about at a high level, but everyone's doing it all the time, right? We don't have to see God to have God. What if all that's in place and you become a peacemaker? Jesus says you become a peacemaker as one of the highest Beatitudes. Well, I think he's, obviously no one knows what he's talking about really. Always leave that, always. But I think he's talking about the theological virtues turned outwards, where you begin to hold others in your hope, where you can hold others in your faith, and where you can hold others in love. And each of those three I've found is quite powerful in their own way and informed by the others. You can hold a person in hope with love. It's love that might drive you to hold a person in hope, or to faith in a person, to believe in them and to hold them in that faith. Some of the people that come that struggle the strongest, sometimes it seems like all I can do is hold them in hope and faith and love and in my consciousness, not when I'm with them, when I'm not. And if you think about the Beatitudes or any ascent towards God, no matter what map you use, the closer you get to the top, the more packed with power it is, but the less specific it is. That's why the Gnostics had it all backwards. They're wanting more specifics. That's the bottom of the rung. The closer you get to the top, the more dense and concentrated is the power. The closer to God it is, in God's own essence. So what looks primitive to the untrained mind is advanced. And so prayer can become wordless. Prayer can become an activity of the will in a theological virtue. And the theological virtues are packed with vital energy. They're a bit like what it is like to be God looking at the world. And I can tell that I'm failing to say this. There's no way to say it. You can only just say what it's like or what it might be like. If you hold a person in hope, you change their future. I wrote a song last night for the band. It's the first time I've written a song where I didn't just dream it or something. We can hope it's okay. But it's about someone holding a child in hope. And in the song, this character is asking God to please allow him or her this one spell. It's about a person desiring so deeply for the good of this child, but knowing that they can't ask for specifics, knowing that they must trust in God for God's will to be done. And it's this person, male or female, I don't know, that loves so deeply, loves this child so much that they're saying, please allow me this one spell, that I could cast a spell of hope upon this child. Knowing that that hope will change their life in a way unknown to them, in a way unwritten by them. And this is the kind of hope that we must hold for one another and for the world and for our enemies. For the group, especially for the center, for the band. There's a power in it, in this faith. I'm saying hope a lot today, but you could center on any of the virtues. You hold people in them. And when you're in God while you're doing it, you're holding them in God's hope. And you participate in God's hope. God has great hope for you. God has great love for you. God has faith in you. God believes in you. God is holding those theological virtues primarily for you. It's close and dear to God's heart. Faith, hope, and love. That's why we call them the highest virtues. They're not our virtues. Why are they great? Why is faith, hope, and love great? Because you're getting close to God. You're getting close to God in what God is and God in what God is doing. You can hope for another. You can hope for your own path. You can hope for a nearness with God. But that hope is a kind of nearness itself. That hope is a power, and you'll feel it. Many of you have already found it, faith and love too. Many of you already know it, probably all of you know it to some degree. Hope is power. And it's, maybe this is an okay analogy to make, but maybe not, but I'll make it. Peace, joy, love, faith, hope, charity. I would think faith and peace are friends, wouldn't you think? Wouldn't you think faith and peace are friends, cousins? They're connected. When you have faith, you have peace. We just talked about that in the last video I made while I was really sick. Faith brings peace. What does hope bring? Joy. Hope brings joy. And joy is power. And hope is a kind of power. And charity is love. Outpouring of love. They're almost the same thing. 3 different maps, 2 different maps given us of the same ascent. So, you hold your marriage in hope. You hold your friendships in hope. You hold your own salvation in hope. And when you do, it's pretty clear you're tapping into real power. You're tapping into real things, very substantial things, the most substantial of all things. You're doing something real. It is real. It's real. And then you can see why Christianity says doubt is a sin. That sounds mean, doesn't it? But it's not mean. When you have hope and you taste the power of hope, that you're really doing something, no different than if you're splitting wood with an axe. That's something real you're doing. You're doing it. It's the same with hope and faith and love. They're real things you really do. And they're real. They're more real. So then you can see, yes, to doubt, to choose despair, and to choose hatred is a sin against truth itself. I mean, we're going to do it, but it's sinful. It's to be repented of, and we are to come back to reality. And whereas self-pity and despair and nihilism and doubt, whereas those are created by us, and they're utter weakness. You know they are, because when you're in them, look how diminished you are. You're nobody in them. You lose all the good things about yourself when you're in that. All the good is lost. It's literally nothing. It's nothingness. It's worse than nothingness. It's warped and it's twisted. It's retrograde. It takes away. It diminishes us. It diminishes us. When we choose those things, we're choosing death. Faith, hope, and charity, doubt, despair, hatred, or nihilism, or nothing. That's like the devil's theological virtues. That we drop into those and we follow them all the way to what? Well, if the end is infinite love, then we follow them to emptiness, to nothingness. It's a sin that we can't help sometimes, depending on our state of spirituality. The stage we're in especially is largely decides how well we can avoid this. But to choose to dwell in faith, hope, and charity is to dwell in real powers that we don't have to generate, that we don't have to make up, that we don't have to create or embellish. It's putting our faith in something real that actually pays off, and not in the newest placebo and trick, or in the devil's virtues. but it changes outcomes. It changes your outcome. It changes your children's outcome. It changes the outcome of our center. It changes the outcome of the band. Whatever it is you care about, it changes the outcome of that thing to hold it in those powers. And I don't talk about my experience. I try not to talk about it much anymore, for sure. I leave most of it out. But I will just say that it took me a long time to realize this, but I've started 2 projects I really care about, the band and the center, And the way I work is backwards. I do everything backwards. So I know the outcome before I know how to get there. I know the outcome of the band. I knew before I started the outcome of the band. I knew the outcome of the band. And I know the outcome of the center before I started it. I know the outcome, but I don't know how to get there. But I know this. I know that if I hold faith and hope and charity, I know that if I hold those things in that power, that we will arrive in that end because of God's activity in your soul and my soul. Because God will work in it and bring it to where it's supposed to be. And you can know the end. And you can know the core principles that will make it work or not work. There's some things you can hold to that you must. But you don't need to know the end, and you don't need to know the details. The details are nothing. The details are inevitable. Just as whatever complexity in the world you want to think about, molecular structure, DNA, genetics, the atomic structure of the universe, just as that was the last thing to form after God said, let it exist. First, it exists. First, God has hope and faith and love for it, and later it forms into form. And because you hold other people in these virtues, it's sorcery to hold the end in mind. You don't know the end. You don't know where they should end. You don't know how it should look. I don't know how the center should look in 10 years. I can only allow that to grow in you and me. But I know hope and faith and love are the foundation of it. Same with the band. Same with the band. I don't know how we will sound. Not for sure. I know some elements. Listening to one another. Because that's love. Appreciating one another. That's love. Communicating with one another egolessly. That's love. I mean, of course you can see so much about what it would look like. But you don't know the form. You can't know that. To control the form is to practice sorcery. It's wrong. It's backwards. If you control the form, it's all you have in the end is the form. You don't have faith and hope and love. It's not packed with power. It's the law. It's the law, which cannot save. One second. It's mostly all I want to say. There's a lyric from this band I really like. It says, some folks trust in reason, others trust in might. I don't trust in nothing, but I know it will come out right. It's very close. It's very close to what we're saying. If God says, let there be light, there is light. And you could study all the details, and they're beautiful. But first, God believed there would be light. If God makes someone like you, Jamie, Spencer, Jesse, Lauren, everyone, right? Go on all night. If God makes someone like you, God makes you with faith and hope and love, has faith in you, has hope in you, and has love for you. Jesus holds us in his faith. His faith saves us. We're, stumbling into form. Accidentally coming into shape. Under his faith. His faith is power. His faith is a spell that he casts upon you. As is his hope, which is his joy and his love. They're just trying to raise us up to be like God. They're just trying to raise us up to be like Christ. And to live in the world the way God lives in the world. As humans, not as gods. But in the pattern, in the image of it. That's all they're doing. That's all they're trying to bring us to. Heal our wounds so we can see the other. Heal our wounds so we can see God. Heal our wounds so we can enter God and become one with God. And live in the direction God lives. Because we live in the exact opposite direction as that in our fallen state. Hold the world in hope and hold it in faith and hold it in love. Not our hope, not our faith, not our love, not our peace, not our joy, not our charity. God's, Christ's. The details sort themselves out over time. They matter. But the organizing energy, the organizing consciousness is faith, hope, and charity. Peace, joy, love. Okay. Thanks, everybody. I'm sorry we couldn't do group. For sure next week, of course. And I'm assuming I'll be doing sessions again next week, so schedules are back on. Apologize for missing this week. Donations can sometimes be a little skittish lately, and I just want to remind you how important they are to me. It's my only source of income, so continue to be generous and remember, just remember that this matters to you, this place matters to you, and that's probably all I want to say about that. Thanks everyone so much.